We have seen a really clear rise in the number of parents that are setting up pensions for their kids. Who gives, frankly, a pig's arse about child pensions? You know, many of us would be living longer with expensive care needs. 80% of millennials expect some kind of inheritance. Quite a high percentage of those people will be disappointed. So the logic is if you put in £50 a month now, your child could look forward to a £1 million pension pot. These products aren't really about retirement and our kids retiring at all. They're about... Hey folks, welcome back to It's All Relative with me, Dr. Eliza, helping you understand the social and economic forces governing your lives. Let's get into it. This week, we're going to be delving into an issue that I became obsessed with for a bit, not for my own children, but because of what I thought it told us about where families are at. So we have seen a really clear rise in the number of parents that are setting up pensions for their kids from birth. Okay, and the idea is that you pay a small amount into a pension pot for your child. So by the time they are 60, they will have, through compound, interest and time, amassed quite a healthy pension because they have been saving since they were naught, right? And I think, whilst it's interesting concept, I think what's really interesting is what it's telling us about how families are thinking about financial security. So as parents become far less confident in their ability to, hand over big inheritances or house deposits or a free university education, many are turning to child pensions as a way of basically providing a pot for their kids that leans into the thing they have a lot of, which is time. Okay, their kids have time. And what they don't have a lot of, which is disposable income and money. And therefore, I don't think the rise in junior pensions is anything to do with retirement per se. It's to do with the fact that parents are able to invest in them as a way of giving certainty to their kids in a time of uncertainty. I don't know if you knew this, but Warren Buffett, one of the greatest investors of our time, if he's someone you're into, okay, you will have heard of him. Hopefully everyone's heard of him. One of the fascinating things about, I was reading The Psychology of Money, where Morgan Housel talks a lot about investing and compound interest, and actually the real gift in investment culture isn't money that you put in, but the time you allow money to accrue, right? Anyway, I found out that by the time Warren Buffett was aged 30, he was already worth $1 million, right? But his skill wasn't the investments that he made, but the age at which he started investing. Now, he started investing when he was 11, okay? Warren Buffett started investing when he was 11. And within that kind of wonderful example is a kind of universal truth, is that if compound interest is the, eighth wonder of the world, as people say, it's actually to do more with time that you allow that compound interest to develop and mature, rather than the money that you're putting in. And I think that that's becoming a key investment policy for modern parenthood, which is why you're seeing the rise of child pensions. And I think in an age when millennial parents in particular are feeling that they have less money to pass on and less disposable income to save, they are thinking about not maybe setting up a junior ISA that kids can access when they're 18, but setting up a junior pension or junior SIP for when their kids can open when they're 60 or maybe 65, 68. Who knows when they'll be able to open it. And if you think about it, it's this idea of compound interest potentially working not over 40 years, but potentially with our kids' pension could be compounding over 70 years. And well into the 22nd century. I guess that's the kind of future gazing I like. So the logic is if you put in £50 a month now, your child could look forward to a £1 million pension pot when they eventually retire. And I suppose, the point is that in the case of my kids, I will certainly be probably long dead. But that sort of small sacrifice now could have huge rewards later for your children. The proof is in the data, right? So the number of junior pensions has increased by 36% in the last 4 years. And I think a lot of this is grandparents trying to divert resources and wealth and using pension contributions for their grandkids to avoid inheritance tax. But I think the psychology behind these products is even more interesting than their potential. It's all relative. It's the mug. We have branded goods here, and it's reflective of the fact that I have a weekly Substack called It's a Relative out every Friday, and as you can see, we also have a weekly YouTube show out every Wednesday. Please do go over to Substack, subscribe. You'll get everything for free, no paywall, and I'd love it if you could comment, like on any of the posts. Now I say this a lot, and I'm sure you're not hearing this for the first time, is that we are living in a period of longevity and uncertainty. So we're living longer quite often in ill health, although life expectancy has stalled. But the broader conversation, particularly around a certain group within society, is longevity. And we're going to have to work longer, and we're going to have to live longer, and we're going to have to fund our lives for longer. And, it has been estimated that Gen Alpha, for example, have a 50-50 chance of living to 100. And so this idea, actually, of saving for our retirement from birth sort of makes sense in that kind of life trajectory, right? And actually, a pension, therefore, from birth no longer looks weird, actually looks quite savvy. And what's interesting is that governments are starting to think this way too. So Germany has introduced the Frühstart-Rente. I mean, that's my best German accent. Which is a state-subsidised retirement plan for children aged between 16 to 18, where the government pays €10 a month into a retirement savings account for that next generation. But it's not just Germany doing this. In the US, for example, Trump has recently introduced baby bonds. Even in the UK here, we had actually something that was quite forward-thinking in its time. It was back in 2005 where Gordon Brown launched the Child Trust Fund. Now, the idea was that the government made a certain number of payments between $250 and $500 for children that were born after 2002. It was eventually abolished in 2011 by the coalition government as part of, I suspect, the austerity package. But the rationale behind it was that it was a universal benefit that was unduly benefiting the middle class who could afford to top up the accounts themselves. And it was replaced by the junior ISA. And if you have one of those for your kids, you will know that that's something that can be accessed from the age of 18. And what's interesting is still, in 2021, there was around 10.5 billion sitting in over 6 million child trust fund accounts that had yet to be claimed. And whether we're talking about personal or government investment here, they're both trying to solve the same problem, which is that we're living longer, much more precarious careers, much more expensive assets. And what's interesting is both the government and the family has come up with the same solution, which is invest early, make it automatic, and allow time to do its thing. And I think it's interesting because, for a long time in the UK, we've talked about sort of the reinvigoration of the welfare state, the reinvigoration of the state building more council houses, a sort of reimagining of what was built and constructed in the aftermath of the Second World War, the formation of the welfare state, where we had, the beginnings of the NHS, where we had, quite expansive housing program, where we had free education. This is something very different. And these schemes are actually where the state becomes less of a welfare provider and more of a kind of seed investor, setting up a sort of seed pension program for its junior citizens. It's, roping citizens into capital markets from birth, basically. Now, you can sort of ideologically poo-poo that if you want, from a left-wing perspective. But it's interesting sort of building equality and security, less from redistribution of wealth, more in involving people in the markets as early as possible. So it's a bit like what they've done with the pensions and the evolution of private pensions for workers. It's now coming true of children. I guess we're facing some really difficult challenges as families and as governments around how we fund the future. All of this is essentially about that. And the systems of yesteryear and the presumptions of yesteryear, even demographically, cannot be assumed. And so therefore the solutions have to be different. I think about this because actually, if we are building a pension for our child, it's also coming at exactly the moment when something like inheritance is becoming less secure. And I think this is super interesting is because I wrote a book called Inheritocracy, right? Okay, here it is. Do buy it. It's available on audiobook. But one of the things that came out of the book when I wrote it was how uncertain inheritance is. Now, in the UK, we have something called gifting, right? So and in fact, the inheritance tax laws are also almost designed for you to gift as much of your money away in your lifetime rather than give it to people at the point of death, give it to your relatives at the point of death. So it actively sort of slightly dissuades you from holding onto your wealth until death. In the US, it's the opposite. But the point is that if we think about inheritance at the moment, passing on money at the point of death is more uncertain now than at any other time in history, but more important now than at any other time in history. Let me explain. When I was writing the book, one of the things that became really obvious to me is that people were over-relying on the idea of an inheritance coming. I remember talking to one corporate lawyer who said to me, I'm not paying into my pension. I'm expecting basically some sort of inheritance to fill that pot, that hole in my finances. I remember in the data that we got commissioned by YouGov, it was astounding how many saw inheritance as a certainty. 80% of millennials expect some kind of inheritance. And I would say quite a high percentage of those people will be disappointed. Not only in the amount, but even like potentially if it ever comes, right? And I think that, you know, many of us will be living longer with complex, expensive care needs, okay? So the idea that inheritance is guaranteed is obviously for the birds. And I think another reason why people are thinking about, oh, maybe actually a really good idea is to create a pension for my kids, because it does essentially create a level of certainty for my kids that maybe I don't have, because I'm still reliant on parents gifting me money at their, you know, at the point of death. So I guess to sort of kind of bring this to conclusion, it's a weird subject to have written an essay about. Who gives, frankly, a pig's arse about child pensions? But I think it speaks to a broader sociological problem. These products aren't really about retirement and our kids retiring at all. They're about, psychologically, our desire in an age of uncertainty to create a level of certainty for our kids. They're a recognition that parents can't control house prices, labour markets, AI disruption, longevity, future of the welfare state, national debt. What they can control is when they start saving for their kids. You know, like Warren Buffett, what they're betting on is time itself, and the market, obviously. And that essentially is the greatest asset they can give their kids. So we've been thinking about how we can make the show better. We've been thinking about particularly the kind of conversations you guys are having in the comment section of Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and TikTok. And we want to be able to answer those questions. So if you have a burning question or a point of confusion or deliberation, or want my opinion and thoughts on anything, please do leave it in the comments of any of our content, and we will endeavour to answer those questions in the new Q&A show we are launching in August. Could be anything. It could be like, what's Eliza's thoughts on this new booklet from Gabriel Zuckman, We Need to Tax Billionaires, which I'm going to be reading this weekend and actually giving you the answer to my thoughts on that. It could be anything from, you know, female breadwinners to male carers. We could be looking at the gender wars. We could be looking at the economic wars. We could be looking at geopolitics. Whatever it is, whatever you think you want answered, or the kind of conversations you want to be having, get in touch and we'll endeavour to give you our thoughts, our data and insights. Please do press the subscribe button. Is it over here or over here? I don't know. Here. Because it really does enable you to know when the next episode is out. See you next week.